Okay, I think I'm recording now. Yep, it says recording. Okay. Good plan.
What is the name of the workspace?
I think it's called like HGSE webinar.
Okay. No, I'm sorry. The
team?
The team's called like Data Flare.
Yeah, I'm on Data Flare, and then when we, okay, never mind. You guys continue.
Are you sure? We can give you a few minutes to.
No, I don't want to hold you guys back. I'll watch the video and figure it out. So I'll watch while you guys are doing this.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you guys for kind of like dealing with these webinar issues. I am going to start sharing my screen. Okay. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. So I know we mentioned this a little bit yesterday, but thank you guys for being so flexible. This obviously isn't ideal, but I'm glad we still get to kind of touch some of the basics with how to build an app. Today we'll be going over Python, which is kind of a back-end language, and that'll help us kind of tie everything together tomorrow. So yesterday we talked about like everyone starts somewhere. The reason that coding is hard is because it just takes a lot of practice like anything else. So one thing that I showed the folks yesterday is this is Mark Zuckerberg's first web page, which looks terrible. And so like just as a coder, as like an early learner of anything, know that you're going to start somewhere. And eventually when you practice, you know, you can become great. But it is frustrating at first. And especially today, because it'll be like, we're essentially learning like 2 or 3 days worth of material in about an hour. So I think this will be best to kind of like get your feet wet. And then as you start looking at resources, you might come back and things might start making sense. When we talk about a web app, we talk about kind of like 3 different layers. We have the content that's on the page, and that's HTML. When we add some style to that content, that's with a language called CSS, which is the style. And then today, we'll be talking about Python, which is the back end. That's kind of what puts the muscle or power behind our code. There's a lot of different back-end languages. So you might have heard of C or Java or Ruby, but we're going to learn Python because for you guys going into whatever you want to do, if you want to do data analysis, if you want to make a game, if you want to make an app, if you like essentially anything Python can do, and it's a really nice language to learn. Yesterday we talked a little bit about HTML, which is just how the web is written with a bunch of tags. You have opening tags and closing tags, which wraps around content. The entire thing is called an element, and we'll need to know this for tomorrow when we build our app. Normally tags kind of open and close, but sometimes if you want to add extra information about a tag, we're going to add that information inside the opening tag with these things called attributes, which just add extra information. And again, this is all review from yesterday, but wanted to quickly highlight it, or from 2 days ago. And then finally, in order to add style, we can take each of those HTML elements, so in this case, the body, H1, and LI, and we can add certain rules. So this is saying, hey, browser, before you give me the HTML page, I want you to take the body and turn the background color powder blue. Before you render or display all the H1 or headers, I want you to take the color and turn it to blue, and I want you to put the font size at 110 pixels. So HTML and CSS are talking to the browser or the front end, what the user sees. Python today will be talking to the computer. So when we talk about a language, it's essentially saying like, we know if we were to like rip apart a computer, it's just a bunch of metal, and those metal pieces are either on or off, so zeros or ones. So someone went ahead and wrote a language, multiple languages, to make sure that we can communicate with those zeros and ones. And Python, again, is just one of many what we call like backend languages. And we say backend because it's talking to the computer directly, as opposed to HTML and CSS, which are talking to the browser and telling us what to display. Does anyone have any questions about like what a language is, or what I guess what Python is? What are your guys' questions?
No questions so far.
Any questions? Okay. So for example, like as a human, if this were my grocery list and I wanted to read it out, I might say like, hey, will you read every item on the grocery list? Like that's what a human understands. What a computer might understand is that I have this variable called grocery list. I need to assign it to a list, and we'll learn about these later, but like there's very specific syntax. We have opening bracket and a closing bracket, and each item in my list is separated with a comma. And then once we've made that list in Python, we can say something like, for every item in the grocery list, and I put grocery list because that's the value I gave this variable, I want you to print the item. And so we'll talk about exactly like what that is, but generally Python is just taking like human language and putting it into a form that humans can understand. Python's also very readable. So even if you didn't know Python, you could probably gather what's in this purple box without necessarily, like having studied a bunch of things. So the first thing we're going to talk about is data types. It's interesting to talk, like, even think about, like, did you guys see Hidden Figures at all? Like how big those computers were, and like computers at their core are just a bunch of like on-off switches, and each one of those on-off switches is literally like one tiny wire that's called a transistor that can store 1 bit of data. So it's either 0, which is off, or 1, which is on. If we take all of those bits and combine them in a series of 8s, each 8 bits, each 8 on-off switches is called a byte. And then, like, if you think about your computer, or like, I don't know, an iPod, it's like 25 gigs or like 35 megs. So they're talking about megabytes, which means like how many pieces of little tiny on-off switches can we store? So it's important to kind of think about how things get stored as zeros and ones, because we have to be really careful about data types, meaning, are we going to ask our computer to store a word? Are we going to ask it to store a number? And that literally will tell the computer how many of these like on-off switches it should like store our information in. So that's kind of all we'll do for slides. The rest will kind of be me typing and coding, and then I'll give you a few challenges. Again, this might be a little hard with the webinar as opposed to being in person, so let me know if we need to like switch something or slow it down, and we'll do the best we can. And then any tweaks we need to make before tomorrow, we can definitely do.
I have a question.
Good? Yes.
Yeah. So just on the data types.
Yeah.
So if we have one word, it doesn't matter how many characters are in the word, one word will be 1 bit. Is that what we're saying? Or
that's a really good question. That's not quite what we're saying. I actually don't know the conversion. You guys can still see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Different languages take a certain amount of bits depending on the data type. So like this is C. So a string, like a character in C is 1 byte. That's one.
So the letter A is 1 byte, for example.
Yes. Yep. And like an integer, which we'll talk about is a number, is between 2 or 4 bytes. Yeah, really good question. I actually don't know, like, you're not supposed to know how many bits and bytes things take up. I more just wanted to let you know that like that's why we care, is because the computer's going to like treat a word differently than it's going to treat a number, differently than it's going to treat a decimal. Good question.
So that will matter when we like load our app, for example. Will it take more time to load a certain number of bytes?
Yes,
Is that why it matters?
Exactly.
Okay.
Like if you put everything as like, I wouldn't worry about this too much. Like the developers at Google need to worry about this because they're making things that like thousands or millions of people use. So memory storage is an issue. For us, like we're writing lines of code that are like 20 lines of code. It doesn't really matter.
Okay.
But as you'll see like in a second, it matters in the case of like how data types are interacted with. So can you guys see my screen okay?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So essentially, if we think about a computer as being able to like store a bunch of data, and when we write instructions, we're able to manipulate that data. This is kind of why it's important to like know the different data types. So one of the first data types is a string. And a string, like a lot of people say it's a word. But if you look at your keyboard, it can actually be like any of those symbols. So for example, if I wanted to put, you know, the weather right now is sunny, or at least in Chicago. So I know that sunny is a string because I started it and opened it with quotes. If I said the temperature, it doesn't really make sense for the temperature to be 67 in a string because we know that temperature is a number. So I'm actually not going to put these quotes in it. So right now we see that Cloud9 is doing some nice formatting for us, and our strings are in green, and our integers are in orange. And if I wanted to say, like, I'm trying to think of what a decimal might be, the cost of an item, maybe the cost of an item is like $8.78. This is a float because it's decimals. This is an integer because there's no decimal, and this is a string. A common misunderstanding is that strings are only words, but if I wanted to say like a curse word, right, my string could technically be like, you know, like comic book curse words or whatever. And it could have spaces. A string is essentially like if you think about each like keyboard on your, each key on your keyboard being like a bead and you string them together, it could be anything. It just starts and ends with quotes. Does anyone have any questions about data types? I'll take that as a no. So like when we think about, well, what can we do with all these data types? Why is it important that we're storing each thing as a variable? Well, first of all, right now, our computer knows that the value sunny is stored in the variable weather. Temperature right now has the value of 67. Cost has a value of 876. So right now, I'm gonna run this intro to Python. And right now we shouldn't see anything get printed to our console because we don't have any print statements. So down here, this is where I interact with my files. I can say ls to list all the files that I have. And the two files that it sees right now are Python intro folder and starter app folder. And I know those are folders because there's slashes after them. If I want to change into the Python intro folder, I write cd, which means change directory, and then I can write Python intro. Now we see that our workspace has changed the path, so now I'm in a workspace and it's saying, hey, you're actually already in the Python intro folder. So it's the same as if I clicked into this. So now when I type ls, I should see these files rather. What are your guys' questions about the command line? Meeting this thing right here.
Nikki, will we get a list of these commands, or I guess we can Google them?
Yes, Google is definitely your friend. The two commands that I'm using are just cd and ls, and that's actually in the tutorial from yesterday too, which is a tutorial. But yeah, if you just Google something like terminal commands,
okay,
you'll see like a ton of them.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, there's even just like some cheat sheets and stuff. Yeah, great question. And again, like if we were teaching this like a full class, we would do an entire lesson on command line. But just in the sake of time, we'll kind of do that quick.
Okay.
So if I wanted to run this specific file, intro to python.py, I have to tell my computer to run it. This is kind of equivalent to like if you're in your file directory, like in Finder, and I wanted to like run main.py, I could just double click it and it would open. It's kind of like double clicking. So if I actually want to run it in my Cloud9 space, instead of like double clicking on it, I'm just going to say something like Python, and then the name of the file that I want to run. The name of the file I want to run is intro to Python. So I can type in, and then all command lines have this nice shortcut where if you hit tab, it fills it in. And now we're going to run the program. Notice that nothing printed, but that's what we expected because there's no print statements. let's say I wanted to like remind myself what the temperature is right now. I could on line 6 write something like print temp. And then there's this dot up here, which means it's not saved. So if I hit Control S or Command S, depending if you have a Mac or a computer, when that dot goes away, it means it's saved. Now when I run this file, what do we expect to see?
$67?
Yeah, we expect to see 67 because our code is going to read from top to bottom. So 2, it doesn't do anything, or 2, it stores sunny into weather. 3, it stores the value 67 into the variable temp. 8, in line 4, it stores the value 8.78 into cost. It doesn't actually show anything until line 6. Once it gets to line 6, it's going to print temp. So in order to run this, I could do 2 things. I could retype the whole thing, Python intro to Python. Or if I hit the up arrow, you'll see that it cycles through my previous commands, which is just kind of a good shortcut to know. I know this command line stuff is a lot to learn at once, but this is kind of just something with practice you'll get. So I'm going to run it again, Python intro to Python .py, and hit enter. And just like Teddy predicted, we see 67.
Weirdly, mine doesn't print.
Did you remember to save?
Yeah, I saved it, and it looks just like yours.
Cool. Do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, how do I, let me see.
I will stop sharing mine, and then you can share it. And hopefully this will be helpful for the rest of you guys too.
Is it sharing?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Oh, interesting. That does not show anything. All right, so yeah, yours looks exactly the same, and yours is saved. Go ahead and just run that command one more time. You can just hit the up arrow and then hit enter. Ooh, that is super interesting. Print temp. Yeah, yours looks exactly the same. So sometimes if you're, sometimes if it's not working, I would just close your terminal. So hit that X by your command line where it says bash, a little lower.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Just hit X and close it. And then hit the plus sign. And then new terminal, yep. And now you'll have to CD into Python intro, space, and then hit tab, yep.
Mm-hmm.
And then now just try running it again. So Python, and then intro, and then hit tab. That is weird. Teji, let's maybe touch base offline and see why we can do it.
All right.
Or right now, if you wanted to open up a new tab in your browser and just write like Cloud9 terminal or Cloud9 print statement not showing up, and see if you can figure it out.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
Yep. And then Jenny had a great question. She says, do spaces make a difference? They do not make a difference. In Python, in other languages, that might be different. There's generally like good conventions where you want to put spaces between things. So like that's best practice. But just like human language, like if your second grader didn't put a space between 2 words, you could probably figure it out. Like the computer in Python is less specific, so it'll probably figure it out. Really good question. And we'll actually have to like switch over to the next meeting in about 8 minutes.
So back to like spaces just for a second.
Yep. No,
so
great.
I noticed that when you wrote the string, the first string, that it was in quotation marks and you had spaces and it didn't matter, but that also doesn't matter when you're not writing a string.
Yeah, so in Python, spaces don't matter.
Whether it's a string or not.
Yeah, so like, do you see how you guys can see my screen now, right?
Yeah. Oh, I see, yeah. Mm-hmm.
If I do temp equals 67, and remember it's the star, so it's not saved, I'm going to command S to save it. When I print this, we still get 67, we still get 8.76. It doesn't matter, it just like looks nicer, and when other people read your code, it's just like nice to them to like think about your syntax. Syntax just means like, how many spaces do I have? How did I format my code? How does my code look? Great question for both of you. Thanks, Jenny and Tanya.
Cool.
All right, so yeah, Ted, hopefully you're maybe able to figure that out like by Google searching. That's super odd.
When I open up arrays and I print like one of the lists, it does work. So
it must be something with intro to Python.py.
yeah.
All right, well then we're actually only going to be in this file for like, I don't know.
Okay.
In theory, a few more minutes, but you guys are asking me questions. Okay, so these are variables. They store the values. It doesn't really necessarily make sense why would we want this now, but like if the temperature is changing, like let's say it goes to 72, I don't have to rewrite my code down here because the value has just changed. So now when I hit save and we run, what two values do we expect to see?
Yeah, 67 and 8.78.
Anyone have a different guess?
72.
Yeah. So now when we run the file, now the value 72 is stored into this variable temp. So when we print the temp variable and then print the cost variable, cost stays the same because we haven't changed it. And temp stays the same. You can also reassign value. So let's say the cost goes up. Now it's like $9.99. First, cost got assigned to $8.78. Then it got reassigned to $9.99. So now when we print it, we should expect it to be $9.99, which was the most recent value. And that's what happens.
Is the command for print the $ plus Python intro to python.py?
No. So this $, if you see, it's like always just part of my terminal, no matter what I do. The command to run this intro to python.py file or any file is to write Python and then the name of the file .py. In this case, our name of the file is called intro to Python.
I can't see where you're writing. Could you expand? The bar at the bottom is
what's blocking it.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Thank you.
Yep. So to run any of these files, like if I wanted to run the arrays file, I would write Python and then arrays.py. That runs arrays.py, but there's nothing in there that's being printed. Okay. If I wanted to run this functions file, I would run Python functions.py. Functions. And it does print something because somewhere in functions.py, I must have a print statement. Good question.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. So I'm going to give you guys a challenge in a second, but Python knows like inherently some operations. And one of those operations it knows is add. And this is why data types becomes important. So if I do something like, so I'm going to comment out lines 7 and 8, which is, I can just use the hashtag, which is shift3. What a comment means is it's still there, but the Python's going to look at 7 and say like, it actually says print temp, but I don't have to read it because it's commented out. It's kind of like crossing something out on a physical piece of paper. So if I wanted to print 4 plus 4, what are our predictions? What do we think we should see in our terminal?
8.
Okay, Python's smart, right? Like Python, one of the things computers can do really well is like really fast math, right? So if we change that to print like a random number times a random number, like this would take a human a really, really long time to do. If I run the Python file, again, I can just hit the up arrow to go back to like the commands that I used to be putting in. So if I hit the up arrow and hit it again, it gives us this like crazy number. So one thing that computers can do really well, of course, is math. But if I print this, what do you think I'm going to see? 2, right?
No, you'll see 1 and 1.
Yeah, I see 1, 1. This right here is called string concatenation, which is up here. Concatenation just kind of means like you smush it together. It's called, I actually don't know why it's called concatenation. Like, I don't know what that word means, other than it means taking two strings and just wherever the plus sign is, it's like you just smushed it together. So that's one of the reasons that data types are important, because it's going to treat adding words together, like smushing them together, and adding numbers together, like I actually know that you want me to physically add these two numbers, or mathematically. All right, new prediction. 3 times 1 is 3, right?
You should get an error.
It might give us an error. You know what, Anika, really, like, I remember you were a developer. In a lot of languages, that would give us an error. Python actually just takes it as I want 1 3 times.
Huh.
1 1 1.
Okay.
So these are just like, each language has a different way of doing this. Some languages like C, which are more strict, it's like your strict mean teacher, it would say like, error, you can't multiply a word by a number or a string by a number. The last thing to know is if I did like 2.7 times 3, I don't know what that is, like 70 something, or sorry, 8.1. This is now a float, because a decimal, a float times an integer is going to give us a float back, or a decimal back. You don't really have to know these things for the sake of what we're doing tomorrow, but it's just kind of good to remember that strings are different than integers, which are different than floats. And going back to Tanya's question, not only are they different with how Python operates with them, but they're also different with how much space they take up, like in your memory. Which, like, way back in the day, like in Hidden Figures, that you had to think about that because, like, you only had so much space. Now we have, like, a ridiculous amount of space. It doesn't matter as much. You guys ready for your, or before I give you your challenge, does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, Nikki, I do.
Yep.
What if you wanted to multiply the two variables together, like, I don't know, cost times temp?
Let's try it. Great question. Cost times 10.
Temp.
Or like temperature.
Oh,
Okay. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah, great
So it
question.
recognizes those as variables then, okay.
Yeah, what Python, like how Python's reading this is like, I'm a computer, I'm on line 14, I'm going to do